The republication of the history of Gibraltar, after the book had long been withdrawn from circulation, requires a few words of explanation. It was originally brought out more than 2 years ago and met with a success attributable to the interest of the subject, far beyond my expectations. Before, however, it had been in circulation more than a few months, the publishing firm to whom the book had been entrusted became involved in difficulties, and their stock passed into possession of the assignees. Those who have had the smallest experience of the mysteries of Basinghall Street will understand the difficulties, delays, annoyances, and expenses which ensue before their property can be recovered. At length, however, through the kind assistance of my present publishers, what at first appeared a hopeless task has ended satisfactorily, and I have again ventured to put the book before the public, almost simultaneously with the publication of the first edition, and perhaps in some degree in consequence of opinions which I had myself advanced. The old question was revived: shall we surrender Gibraltar? To the majority the proposition appeared a mischievous absurdity, but there were not a few who boldly maintained that the fortress was a useless encumbrance, involving a vast outlay of money, and offering no equivalent advantage to the state, upon which it was a burden. The principal public exponents of this theory were Mr. Goldwin Smith, Mr. Bright, and Mr. Congreve. The former embodied his views upon the subject in a letter originally published in the Daily News, and since reprinted as an essay in the Empire. Mr. Bright on more than one occasion expressed his disapprobation of our policy in retaining possession of the place. The grounds upon which their arguments are based are almost identical, and I venture to think they are similarly fallacious. First, they say the occupation of Gibraltar is offensive to Spain, and that a completely cordial alliance with that country is impossible so long as we retain it. Secondly, that the fortress is no longer the key of the Mediterranean, and that Malta affords all the protection our fleets and interests require in that sea. And thirdly, that by retaining it we prevent Spain from granting us commercial concessions, which would be of greater value to England than the mere possession of Gibraltar. Of these objections, the first appears to me to be the weakest. At the conclusion of successful wars, all the great powers of Europe have at one time or another annexed or confiscated portions of the enemy's possessions, either as an indemnity for the expenditure incurred by the country, or in order to secure positions which were essential to the naval or military supremacy of the nation. The loss of territory is no doubt a natural cause of humiliation and consequently of discontent to the people who have to submit to it. But the code of European political morality has not yet reached such perfection that the feelings, pride, or sympathies of nations are taken into consideration when treaties are dictated by successful powers. And it is simply absurd to suggest that England should be called upon to surrender one of her most important dependencies, which she holds by right of conquest, and by cession, because the occupation of it is supposed to be a source of offense to the nation from whom it was taken, and against whom it has been held through 3 memorable sieges. Moreover, upon this point Spain sets us a poor example. Ceuta and Melilla form a part of the territory of Morocco, just as Gibraltar is part of Spain. The Moors are a proud and sensitive people, abhorring the sight of foreigners who profess a religion hateful to them, in possession of part of part of their coasts. Yet Spain not only occupies 3 different military positions in Morocco, but she makes use of them for the purposes of aggression. No doubt some political economists will tell us that the Moors are a barbarian race and that their national feelings are unworthy of consideration. Indeed, Mr. Goldwin Smith, while deprecating the occupation of Gibraltar, suggests that we might effect an exchange with Spain and take possession of Ceuta. Thus, to keep what we won from a nation in fair fight is a crime. To rob a barbarian with whom we are at peace, a merit. The second objection, that the fortress is no longer the key of the Mediterranean and that Malta affords all the protection of our fleet, protection our fleets require in that sea, is open to argument, and therefore becomes a subject of itself, far beyond the limits of a preface. Not that it is difficult to prove that, since the introduction of steam, Gibraltar is of far greater importance to us than ever. It commands, not in the limited sense of a line of fire, the navigation of the narrow passage into the inland sea, and, with the exception of Algeciras, it is the only safe harbor from the Atlantic to Europa Point. As a coaling station alone, therefore, it is invaluable, and where every gun devoted to the defense of the place as a coaling harbor in time of war, our expenditure would be justified. In these days of steam fleets, a squadron sailing from Plymouth to the Mediterranean at full speed could not pass the straits without a fresh supply of coal. In the event, therefore, of necessity, where could we supply the fleet with the means of entering the Mediterranean and engaging an enemy? During the Crimean War, the value of the place to a maritime power was forcibly proved. Without Gibraltar, the vast transport service of England must have broken down, for it was here that her hundreds of steamers, passing and repassing without intermission, were supplied with fuel with the utmost expedition, were repaired if damaged, and victualled if in want of provisions. When we surrender Gibraltar, depend upon it, we shall resign our supremacy in the Mediterranean. When we surrender Gibraltar, depend upon it, we shall resign our supremacy in the Mediterranean. It is the lock of the entrance into a vast harbor. Cede it, and we become subservient to the nation which holds the key. Malta is a formidable fortress, but isolated in time of war, its position would be precarious. Gibraltar, on the contrary, is of independent value, and were Malta taken from us tomorrow, the importance of the Rock as a naval and military post would not be affected. The supposition that if we gave back Gibraltar, Spain would grant us commercial concessions of vast importance must be regarded simply as an idea suggested by the advocates of surrender. When the question was agitated in the press of Madrid 2 years ago, very little was said of concession of any kind, and the fiscal dogmas of Spain are not so easily disturbed. Nor, indeed, does it appear clear that the most liberal commercial treaties with Spain would be equivalent even to the partial surrender of our influence and prestige in the south, or for the loss of a position so admirably adapted to the protection of our trade with the many countries beyond or on the borders of the Mediterranean. Agreeing as I do with the Westminster Review, article, Gibraltar, July 1862. I cannot do better than conclude in his words. We hold Gibraltar by right of conquest, the right which secures to our country a vast majority of our possessions, scattered as they are all over the world, and moreover a right which, in the present condition of mankind, it would be neither wise nor safe to abandon. The possessor of Gibraltar must be the guardian of the Mediterranean, and Great Britain would indeed be unmindful of her duty to herself and to Europe were she to give up so important a station to a weak state. Frederick Sayre, March 1865.